All characters and events described in this story are fictitious. Any resemblance to real people or situations is purely coincidental. Please don't judge too harshly. Every author was once a beginner. We strongly condemn cheating, alcohol consumption, illegal substances, and any violation of the law. Write in the comments what city you are from and where you listen to this audio version. Don't forget to like, share your life experiences, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting story. Michael Watson stood at the kitchen island in his spacious apartment, carefully slicing tomatoes for a salad. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if he were trying to focus on something simple, to block out the thoughts that still clung to the past. The apartment, located on the 15th floor of a modern apartment complex in the city center, was bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. The glass walls let in the noise of the traffic, but up here it seemed distant, like another world. Michael glanced at his watch. It was 6:45 p.m. Jessica was due in 15 minutes. Today was their anniversary, exactly 1 year since they had first met in a cafe on the corner of 5th Street. Michael, fresh from a divorce, felt as broken as old furniture thrown to the curb. His marriage to Elizabeth, which had lasted almost 20 years, had fallen apart when he had learned of her affair with a co-worker. The pain of betrayal still lingered in his chest, but Jessica had become the light at the end of the tunnel. She wasn't just beautiful. Her energy, her laughter, her ability to find joy in the little things made him feel alive again. He took the roast chicken out of the oven, the aroma filling the kitchen. The table was already set. A white tablecloth, 2 wine glasses, candles he had bought that morning, although he had hesitated, was it too banal? Michael ran a hand through his dark hair, which was already starting to gray, and straightened his shirt. He was 52, but he tried to stay in shape. He ran in the mornings, watched his diet. Not for vanity, but to prove to himself that he could still control at least something in his life. The divorce had turned him inside out. Elizabeth hadn't just left, she'd destroyed his confidence. Michael, a successful architect whose designs graced the city's skyline, suddenly felt worthless. He'd spent hours analyzing what he'd done wrong, why he'd failed to notice her distance, why he'd failed to hold on to her. Jessica had changed that. She looked at him as if he were the only person in the room, and that gave him confidence. Today, he wanted to take a step forward, talk about the future, maybe even ask her to move in with him. He knew it was risky. A year wasn't that long, but he felt ready. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Michael dried his hands on a towel and hurried to open it. Jessica stood in the doorway, holding a bottle of wine. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her light blue dress emphasized her slender figure. She smiled, and her eyes, brown with golden sparkles, lit up. "Hello," she said as she walked in. "I hope I'm not late. There's traffic on the roads, as usual." "You're just in time," Michael replied, closing the door. He took the bottle from her and kissed her on the cheek. "You look amazing." "Thank you," Jessica blushed slightly, but then added with a playful note. "You're not bad either, Watson. Is something cooking? It smells incredible." "Yes, I decided to do something special. It's an anniversary after all." She walked into the living room, dropping her bag on the couch. Michael noticed that she was moving a little faster than usual, as if she were nervous. He dismissed the thought as just tiredness. Jessica was a literature teacher at a local college, and she had recently taken a new position that required more time to prepare lectures. "Anniversary," she repeated, sitting down at the table. "I can't believe it's been a whole year. It seems like just yesterday we were arguing about which coffee was better, your black or my vanilla latte." Michael laughed as he placed the salad on the table. "You're still making a mistake when choosing a latte. Black coffee is a classic." "And the classics are boring," she teased, winking. "Life needs to be sweetened, Michael." He smiled, but noticed her gaze slid to her phone, which was lying on the edge of the table. She quickly put it in her bag, as if she didn't want it to be a distraction. Michael sat down opposite her, pouring wine. "To us," he said, raising his glass. "To us," Jessica echoed, clinking her glasses with him. She took a sip and looked at the candles. That's nice. You really tried. I wanted everything to be perfect, Michael admitted. This year, it means a lot to me, Jess. You mean a lot to me. Her smile softened, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. She put down her glass and bowed her head. You're always so serious, she said. But it's sweet. It really is. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. He wanted to say more, but decided to start lightly. Tell me, how are things at your new job? You mentioned that you started lecturing. How are the students? Jessica perked up, her voice becoming more cheerful. Oh, the students are something. Half of them think Shakespeare wrote rap, and the other half don't read at all. But there are a couple of smart ones who ask good questions. Michael nodded as she told him her story. He liked the way she talked about her work with enthusiasm, with a spark. It was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with her. She wasn't just smart, she was alive, real. And your colleagues? He asked. Have you found a common language yet? Yeah, they're pretty good, Jessica said, cutting off a piece of chicken. There's this philosophy teacher, Thomas. He's interesting. He likes to argue about the meaning of life over coffee. Today, we spent the entire lunch discussing Nietzsche. Can you imagine? Nietzsche, Michael raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a fun guy. Well, he's a good conversationalist, she said with a shrug. But mostly I'm just trying not to drown in paperwork. Preparing lectures takes up a lot of time. Michael nodded, but a thought flashed through his mind. She had mentioned Thomas with a slight smile he hadn't noticed before. He pushed it away. Jessica was here with him, and that was all that mattered. You know, he began, choosing his words carefully, I was thinking about us, about where we were going. Jessica froze with her fork in her hand, her gaze becoming more attentive. Where are we going? She asked, a playful note creeping into her voice. Michael, are you starting your deep conversations again? Maybe so, he smiled. But I'm serious. This has been the best year in a long time. And I want us to be closer. Maybe you'll think about moving in with me. The words hung in the air. Jessica looked at him, her eyes widening, but she quickly looked away, pretending to straighten her napkin. Move, she said, her voice rising slightly. Wow, Michael, that's a big step. I know, he quickly added. I'm not rushing. It's just, I think we could try. I want to build something real with you. She smiled, but it was a forced smile, as if she didn't know what to say. That's sweet, she said finally. Really? But let's take it slow, okay? I have so much work to do right now. My head is spinning. Let's just enjoy the evening. Michael felt a pang of disappointment, but nodded. Of course. No rush. They continued eating dinner, and Jessica turned the conversation to his work. Michael told her about his new project, a skyscraper that would become the city's calling card. She listened, asked questions, but he couldn't shake the feeling that her mind was elsewhere. When she laughed at his joke, her gaze slid back to her bag, where she kept her phone. After dinner, they moved to the couch with glasses of wine. Jessica snuggled up to him, and Michael wrapped his arms around her, inhaling the light scent of her perfume. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. Are you happy? She suddenly asked, looking at him. The question caught him off guard. He looked into her eyes, trying to understand what was hidden behind them. Yes, he answered honestly. With you, yes. And you? She paused, then nodded. Yes, it's just. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing everything right. You know, work, life, all of it. You do more than enough, Michael said, squeezing her hand. You inspire me, Jess. She smiled, but there was something in her smile he couldn't quite place. They sat in silence, looking out the window at the city lights. Michael could feel the warmth of her body, but deep down, a tiny doubt was forming. He brushed it aside. It was their night, their anniversary. Everything was fine. When Jessica left, promising to call tomorrow, Michael stayed behind to clear the table. He looked at the candles, which had already burned out, and thought about her words. Let's not rush. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was pushing too hard, but there was still a slight emptiness in his chest, as if he had missed something important. Jessica Lake walked down the paved path of campus, clutching a folder of lecture notes. The morning air was crisp, with a faint scent of mown grass. The college, spread across several acres of suburban land, was a living organism. Students rushing to class, talking and laughing, professors discussing plans for the semester, and somewhere in the distance the hum of a lawn mower. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the place fill her. She was 41, but here, surrounded by young faces and life, she felt younger, almost like a student. Her new position as a literature teacher at the college was a step up. After years of teaching teens at a small private school, this place seemed like a challenge. She loved everything about it. The old humanities building with its tall windows, the library with its smell of old books, even the coffee shop in the lobby that served decent espresso. But it was the students who excited her most, their questions, their debates, sometimes naive but always sincere. She wanted to be more than just a teacher. She wanted to be someone who inspired. Today was her third day at the new place, and she was already starting to settle in. Jessica adjusted her dark hair, which was pulled back into a neat bun, and glanced at her reflection in the glass door of the building. In her dark green blazer, white blouse, and tight knee-length skirt, she looked professional but not boring. She had always cared about her appearance, not out of vanity, but because it gave her confidence. Deep down, she feared that her attractiveness would fade with age, and this fear, although she rarely admitted it even to herself, pushed her to the mirror more often than necessary. She walked into the auditorium where the first-year students were waiting. 20 pairs of eyes stared at her, some curious, some with obvious boredom. Jessica smiled, placing the folder on the table. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but firm. "We start with Shakespeare today. Has anyone read Romeo and Juliet without being forced to at school?" A few hands went up hesitantly. One guy in the back row, with wild hair and a sweatshirt, chuckled. "Does it count if I watch the movie?" he asked. "If it's the DiCaprio version, then no," Jessica said, and the class laughed. "But plus for trying. Let's figure out why this story still gets people's attention." The lecture went better than she expected. The students debated love and sacrifice, and even those who had seemed uninterested at first became involved by the end. One student, a serious girl with glasses, asked why Romeo and Juliet couldn't just leave Verona and live happily ever after. Jessica thought for a moment, then replied, "Because life rarely gives simple solutions." They were young, impulsive, and surrounded by people who dictated how to live. Sometimes love is not only feelings, but also a struggle with circumstances. She was surprised at how deeply her own words had cut her. After finishing class, Jessica gathered her things and headed to a faculty meeting scheduled in the conference room. She needed to meet her colleagues and discuss the curriculum. The conference room was large, with a long table and windows overlooking the campus. The faculty were already gathering, chatting and pouring coffee from a machine in the corner. Jessica walked in, nodding at a few familiar faces, and took a seat next to a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Martha, a history teacher. "New?" Martha asked, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, I just started," Jessica replied, smiling. "Jessica Lake, literature." "Welcome," Martha said. "It's fun here, but be prepared for endless meetings." The meeting began when the dean, an older man with thick eyebrows, walked into the room. He was talking about scheduling, grants, and new rules for faculty. Jessica tried to listen, but her attention was drawn to the man sitting a few seats away. He was tall, with dark hair, slightly grayed, and a neat beard. His blue jacket fit perfectly, and his eyes, when he looked her way, were sharp, almost mocking. He was writing something down on a notepad, but Jessica noticed him glance at her. When the dean called a break, the man stood up and headed for the coffee machine. Jessica decided to follow him, more out of curiosity than need for coffee. She picked up a cup and stood next to him. "A new semester, but still the same coffee," he said, not looking at her, but with a slight smile. "Is that bad?" Jessica asked, turning to face him. Depends on whether you like the taste of cardboard, he said, finally looking at her. His voice was low and warm. Thomas Brady, philosophy. Jessica Lake, literature. She introduced herself, shaking his outstretched hand. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. Literature, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. So you're one of those people who make students cry over Dostoevsky. Only if they want it themselves, she answered, smiling. And you are one of those who confuse them with Nietzsche. Guilty, Thomas said, spreading his arms. But I try to do it with a smile. Their conversation was interrupted by Martha, who called Jessica over to discuss the schedule. But before leaving, Thomas leaned a little closer. If you want better coffee, there's a place in the center of campus. I go there on Wednesdays. Come along if you're in the mood. Maybe I will, Jessica answered, trying to make her voice sound casual. She returned to her seat, feeling a slight warmth in her chest. It wasn't anything serious, just a pleasant exchange. But she liked the way Thomas looked at her interested, with a hint of challenge. It reminded her of when she was younger, when men noticed her without her even trying. With Michael, it was different. He loved her, he cared, but his attention was predictable. And this was new. After the meeting, Jessica went to her office, small but cozy, overlooking the campus courtyard. She was sitting at her desk, checking notes, when her phone vibrated. A text from Michael. How was your day? I'm smashed, but thinking of you. She smiled, but her fingers hovered over the screen. She started to type a reply, but stopped, remembering the dinner the night before. His words about moving had caught her off guard. She loved Michael, she really did, but the thought of taking such a big step was terrifying. What if she wasn't ready? What if she wasn't cut out for this at all? She sent a quick, "Good day, students are funny. Don't overwork yourself," and put the phone down. Her gaze fell on the stack of books on the table. Shakespeare, Woolf, Austen. She loved her job and loved this new chapter in her life. But deep down, she felt an emptiness she couldn't explain. She always needed something else, proof that she was wanted, that she was still the one. On Wednesday morning, Jessica stood in front of the mirror in her office, touching up her lipstick. She had chosen a light gray suit that showed off her figure, and she had let her hair fall softly over her shoulders. She hadn't specifically planned to meet Thomas, but she knew he would be at the coffee shop. It was just coffee, nothing more. She grabbed her bag and walked out. The coffee shop was small, with wooden tables and large windows. Thomas was already there, sitting by the window with a cup and a book. He looked up as she entered and smiled. "You came after all," he said, pushing back his chair. "I thought Shakespeare had swallowed you up." "Shakespeare can wait for now," Jessica replied, sitting down. "What do you have? Nietzsche or something easier?" "Can't," he said, showing the book. "But I won't torture you. What are you drinking?" "Vanilla latte," she replied. "Really?" Thomas laughed. "It's dessert, not coffee." "I like desserts," she said with a shrug. He ordered coffee for her, and they began to chat. Thomas was an easy conversationalist, he joked. He asked questions, but he was also a good listener. They talked about books, about students, about how the campus had changed in recent years. Jessica found herself laughing more than usual. Her phone was in her bag, and she didn't check it, not thinking about Michael or the text that was surely waiting for her. "You don't seem like your typical literature professor," Thomas said, sipping his coffee. "No offense, but they're usually, well, boring." "You don't look like a philosopher," she retorted. "I thought you all had beards and sweaters." "There is a beard," he said, touching his chin. "The sweater is at home, but you did not answer. What brought you here?" Jessica thought about it. She could have told the truth, that she wanted a change, that she was tired of the routine, that she was afraid of being stuck in a life that didn't fulfill her. But instead, she smiled. "I wanted to try something new. And you? Why philosophy?" "Because I like asking questions that don't have answers," he said, his eyes twinkling. "And because it's impressive at parties." She laughed, feeling her cheeks warm. It was stupid, but she liked the feeling, easy, exciting, like she was 20 again. She knew Thomas was married. The wedding ring on his finger was hard to miss. But it was just a conversation, just coffee. No big deal. Meanwhile, Michael sat in his office, surrounded by blueprints and sketches. His team was working on a skyscraper project, and the deadline was looming. He rubbed his temples, trying to focus on the computer screen. His thoughts kept returning to Jessica. Her response yesterday had been short, almost formal. He knew she was busy, but he still felt a little anxious. He sent her another text. "How are the lectures? Dinner tonight?" And went back to work, hoping that an evening with her would ease his doubts. Jessica and Thomas walked out of the coffee shop, still chatting. He suggested walking her to the building, and she agreed. When they stopped at the entrance, he looked at her with the same mocking smile. "It was fun," he said. "Shall we do it again?" "Maybe," she replied, trying not to smile too widely. "If the coffee is better." He laughed, and they parted ways. Jessica walked into her office, feeling her heartbeat a little faster. She pulled out her phone and saw a text from Michael. Her smile faded. She loved him, but now, after this conversation with Thomas, she felt inspired. And this feeling, although scary, was too good to ignore. Michael Watson sat at his desk in his office, staring at his computer screen. The blueprints for the skyscraper he was working on were open, but his gaze wandered absently along the lines. Outside, on the 23rd floor, the city was bustling, but here in his corner office, all was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. On his desk sat a framed photograph of him and Jessica on the beach last summer. She had been laughing, her hair blowing in the wind, and he was looking at her as if he couldn't believe his good fortune. Now the photograph gave him a strange feeling, a mixture of warmth and anxiety. It was a week after their anniversary, and something had changed. Jessica was texting less often. Her replies were short, sometimes taking hours to arrive. Yesterday he'd texted, "Dinner tonight? I can pick you up." She'd only responded this evening, "Sorry, I'm swamped at work. How about tomorrow?" Michael tried not to think about it too much. She was busy, a new position, new responsibilities. But there was a growing worry in his chest, familiar as an old scar. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He was 52, and he knew he couldn't let the past dictate his thoughts. His divorce from Elizabeth had left a deep wound. He trusted her implicitly, and then he'd learned of her affair with a coworker, an accidental text on her phone he wasn't supposed to see. The pain of betrayal was sharp, but worse was the feeling that he hadn't noticed it all coming apart. Now, with Jessica, he'd promised himself he'd be more attentive, but her distance stirred up old fears. There was a knock at the door, and David, his colleague and longtime friend, walked in. David was a couple of years younger, with a touch of gray in his hair and a habit of wearing brightly colored ties that belied his serious engineering job title. "Are you alive?" David asked, plopping down in the chair opposite. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "Almost," Michael replied, smiling wearily. "The project is pressing. The client wants last-minute changes." As always, David chuckled, taking a pack of nuts out of his pocket. "Want some? Helps with stress." Michael shook his head. "I'm fine. Just a lot of things." David squinted as he chewed a nut. "This isn't about the project, right? What happened? Jessica?" Michael sighed. He didn't like to discuss personal matters, but David was one of the people who knew him before and after the divorce. They drank beer together on those nights when Michael was trying to figure out how to move on. I don't know," Michael began, looking at the photograph. "She's become distant. We see each other less often. She speaks to me less often. She's always busy." "New job," David said with a shrug. "Professors are always drowning in paperwork at the beginning of the semester. Give her time." "I know," Michael nodded, "but it's similar to what happened with Elizabeth. I thought she was just busy back then, too." David paused, looking at him. Then he put down the nuts and leaned forward. "Look, Michael, you can't live your life looking back. Jessica isn't Elizabeth. You said it yourself, she's different. Maybe you're just winding yourself up." "Maybe," Michael said, but his voice was unsure. "But I feel like something's wrong. She doesn't even answer my messages every other time. I waited all day yesterday for her to answer." "Ask her," David suggested, straightforwardly, without hints. "You're not a boy who plays guessing games." Michael nodded, but inside he wasn't sure he wanted to know the truth. He was afraid that asking a direct question would destroy the delicate balance they had built. Instead, he changed the subject. "How's your project going?" he asked. "Have you finished the foundation?" David smirked, realizing that Michael was avoiding the conversation, but he played along. They discussed work, but Michael's thoughts kept returning to Jessica. He decided to text her again when he got home. Maybe David was right, and he was just overexcited. At this time, Jessica was sitting in a cafe on campus across from Thomas Brady. Their coffee meetings had become regular twice a week, sometimes 3 times if they both had a break between lectures. Today, they had decided to have lunch, and the cafe, with its wooden tables and the smell of freshly brewed coffee, was filled with students and faculty. Jessica was eating a salad, and Thomas, as usual, ordered a sandwich and black coffee. "Do you seriously think Shakespeare is overrated?" Thomas asked, sipping his coffee. His eyes were shining, as if he was enjoying their argument. "Not overrated," Jessica said, poking her lettuce with her fork. "But he's too often put on a pedestal. People forget he wrote for the crowd, not the critics. His plays are the soap operas of their time." Thomas laughed, leaning back in his chair. His blue jacket was slightly unbuttoned, and Jessica couldn't help but notice how confident, almost defiant, he looked. She liked the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, as if she was the only one worthy of his attention. "Soap operas," he said. "That's bold. If you say that in a department meeting, you'll be burned at the stake." "Let them try," she replied, smiling. "And you? Who is your overrated philosopher?" "Oh, that's simple," Thomas said, leaning closer. "Plato. All those ideal forms of his are beautiful, but useless. Life is too chaotic for such theories." "Chaotic?" Jessica asked. "Are you being philosophical now, or are you just trying to sound profound?" "Both," he said with a wink. "But seriously, life isn't about finding perfection. It's about living with imperfection, embracing it." His words struck a chord with her. Jessica put down her fork and looked at him. She knew he was married. The ring on his finger was a constant reminder. But their conversations, their light flirtations, were like a breath of fresh air. With Michael, everything was warm, reliable, but predictable. But Thomas was unpredictable, and it awakened in her a long-forgotten feeling, the desire to be noticed, to be desired. "Are you always like this?" she asked, squinting. "You sound like you're giving a lecture, but with a subtext." "What's the subtext?" he asked, feigning surprise. "I'm just having coffee with a colleague." "Uh-huh," Jessica said, but her smile betrayed that she didn't believe in his innocence. Thomas leaned back, looking at her with that same mocking smile she loved so much. "You know, you're interesting," he said. "Most people here are either bored or trying too hard. But you're real." Jessica felt her cheeks warm. She wanted to brush off the compliment, but instead she said, "And you know how to talk too well. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm harmless. I just like good company." She laughed, but a thought flashed through her mind. This wasn't just coffee anymore. She knew she should set boundaries, but she didn't want to. She liked this feeling light, exciting, like she was young and free again. When they finished lunch, Thomas offered to walk her to her building. They walked around campus, continuing to chat. As they parted, he said, "Tomorrow I have a window at 2. If you're free, we can continue the debate about Shakespeare." "We'll see," Jessica said, trying not to smile too widely. "Unless you start defending Plato." He laughed, and they parted ways. Jessica walked into her office, her heart beating faster. She pulled out her phone and saw a text from Michael. "How were the lectures? Dinner tonight?" Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to answer, but instead she put the phone down on the desk and stared out the window. Her thoughts were filled with Thomas, his smile, his voice, his gaze. Michael got home late, around 9 o'clock. His apartment was dark, only the light from the city windows filtering into the living room. He threw his briefcase on the couch and pulled out his phone. Jessica hadn't responded to his text. He wrote another, "Are you okay? Call me when you're free." Then he sat on the couch, staring at the screen, but there was no response. At 10 o'clock, his phone finally vibrated. A text from Jessica. "Sorry, stayed late at work. Tired, let's talk tomorrow. Good night." Michael read the text twice. Stayed late at work. Something about the words didn't feel right, but he couldn't figure out why. Jessica sat in a downtown cafe across from Thomas. It was dark, and the cafe, with its warm light and the smell of baking, was almost empty. They had met after her lectures, when she had told Michael she would be staying late at college. It was a lie, and she knew it. But she wanted to feel the thrill Thomas had given her once again. "Do you often work late?" Thomas asked, looking at her over his coffee cup. "Sometimes," she replied with a shrug. "New semester, lots to do." "Is there someone waiting at home?" he asked, his voice light but suggestive. Jessica hesitated. She could have told the truth about Michael, about their anniversary, about his offer to move in. But instead, she smiled. "No one who's going to make a scene for coming home late," she said. Thomas nodded, his eyes sparkling. "Okay," he said, "because I wouldn't want you to rush." They continued talking, and Jessica felt her doubts dissolve. She knew it was wrong, but at that moment she knew everything equal. She loved the way Thomas looked at her, the way he listened, the way he made her feel alive. When they said goodbye, he touched her hand, just barely, but enough to make her heart beat faster. "See you tomorrow," he said. "See you tomorrow," she replied, her voice quieter than she expected. When Jessica got home, she went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. Her phone was on the nightstand, and she knew Michael was waiting for her call. But instead, she closed her eyes, thinking about Thomas. She felt ashamed, but that feeling was drowned out by another feeling, a desire she couldn't ignore. Jessica Lake sat in Thomas Brady's office, holding a cold cup of tea. It was about 9 o'clock, and the Humanities building was empty. It was getting dark outside, and only the street lamps on the campus path cast a dim light. Thomas's office was small but cozy, shelves filled with philosophy books, an old wooden desk covered in papers, and two chairs by the window where they were now sitting. Their conversation had begun as a discussion of the curriculum, but had quickly turned to personal topics, literature, life, dreams. "Do you really think people read books to escape?" Thomas asked, leaning back in his chair. His voice was low, with a hint of mockery, but his eyes were intent. "Not to run away," Jessica replied, putting her cup down. "Rather, to understand yourself. Literature is like a mirror. You see your fears, your desires in it." "A mirror," Thomas repeated, squinting. "Interesting. What do you see when you read? What are you afraid of?" Jessica hesitated. She didn't want to answer honestly, but his gaze, direct and slightly challenging, didn't let her avoid the question. She adjusted her hair, which had come loose from its bun, and shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe that life will pass, and I will never find something real." "Real?" he asked, leaning closer. "What is real to you?" She looked at him, feeling her heart beat faster. Their meetings, coffee, dinner, now this evening, had long ceased to be just friends. She knew it was dangerous. Thomas was married, and she was with Michael. But in his presence, she felt alive, desired, as if she were that 20-year-old girl again who could conquer hearts with a single glance. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Maybe these are the moments when you feel like anything is possible." Thomas smiled, but there was no mockery in his smile. He stood up, walked over to the shelf, and pulled out a book, a tattered volume of Camus. "There," he said, coming back and sitting closer. "Camus says that life is absurd, but that's what makes it worth living, for these moments when you feel like anything is possible." He opened the book and began to read aloud, his voice soft, almost hypnotic. Jessica listened, but her thoughts were not on the words, but on him, on the way he sat so close, the way his hand brushed hers as he turned the page. She knew she should leave, say it was late, that she had things to do. But she couldn't. When he finished reading, there was silence in the room. Jessica looked at him, and their eyes met. She saw in his gaze what she felt herself a desire that could no longer be ignored. "Jessica," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, "do you know what you're doing to me?" She wanted to answer, to say something light, to laugh it off, but the words stuck. He leaned closer, and she didn't pull away. Their lips met, cautiously at first, then with growing passion. Jessica felt her body respond, everything she tried to suppress bursting out. It was wrong, but at that moment she didn't care. They pulled away, breathing heavily. Thomas looked at her, his eyes dark and full of emotion. "We shouldn't," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I know," Jessica said, her voice shaking, "but I don't want to stop." He nodded, as if that was all he needed to hear. They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation. When they finally pulled away, Thomas took her hand. "No one must know," he said seriously. "This is just between us." Jessica nodded, guilt growing in her chest. She thought of Michael, of his kindness, of his trust. But with Thomas, she felt different, not the woman who was afraid of growing old, but the woman who could still be desirable. "Just between us," she repeated, trying to convince herself that it was possible. They left the building together, but kept their distance so that no one would suspect. Thomas suggested a walk to the park nearby, where it was quiet and almost deserted. The secluded park, surrounded by old oak trees, was lit only by rare lanterns. They walked along a gravel path, their steps crunching in the silence. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked, looking at her. "Yes," Jessica answered, although that wasn't entirely true. Everything happened so fast." "Too fast?" he asked, stopping. She shook her head. "No, I wanted this." He smiled and took her hand. His fingers were warm, and the touch calmed her. They sat on a bench hidden in the trees and continued talking. Thomas talked about his youth, about how he had dreamed of being a writer but chose philosophy. Jessica listened, but her thoughts were confused. She felt excitement, but it was mixed with guilt. She told herself that she deserved this moment, this feeling. Michael loved her, but he didn't see her the way Thomas did. He didn't make her heart beat the way he did. "Have you ever done anything you regretted?" she asked suddenly. Thomas looked at her, his gaze becoming more serious. "Everyone does," he said, "but I try not to live with regrets. Life is too short." She nodded, but his words did not reassure her. They sat in silence until Thomas touched her cheek, pulling her close again. Their kiss was soft, but full of promise. When they parted, Jessica knew there was no turning back. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "It's late." "I'll walk you to your car," he offered. "No need," she answered quickly. "It's better not to risk it." He nodded, understanding. They separated, and Jessica walked to her car, feeling her knees shaking. In the car, she pulled out her phone and saw a text from Thomas. "You're incredible. Good night." Her heart jumped, but she quickly deleted the message, as if it could erase her guilt. At home, Jessica walked into her apartment, throwing her bag on the couch. It was after midnight, and she felt tired but also excited. She'd taken a shower, trying to wash away the feeling of Thomas's scent, his touch, but it hadn't helped. Her phone was on the kitchen table, and she knew Michael had probably texted her. She didn't want to check, but she picked it up anyway. Two messages: "Are you still at work? Call me when you get home," and "Good night, Jess. Love you." Her throat tightened. She started to type a reply, but stopped. What could she say? That she was late with a coworker she had just kissed in the park. She closed her eyes, feeling the guilt pressing down on her. But alongside that guilt was another feeling, a thrill she couldn't ignore. She deserved this, didn't she? After all the years of putting others before herself, she could afford something for herself. Jessica sent a quick, "Just got back, tired. Good night," and turned off her phone. She went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were full of Thomas, his voice, his look, his words. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't stop. Michael woke up early, despite going to bed late. He sat in the kitchen of his apartment, holding a cup of coffee. Jessica had texted him back yesterday, but her message was dry, as if she were writing automatically. He had noticed it a week ago. She had become distant, almost a stranger. He told himself it was because of work, that she was simply adjusting to a new rhythm. But doubt gnawed at him like an old, familiar voice, reminding him of Elizabeth's betrayal. He opened his laptop and started searching for ideas for a surprise. Maybe a weekend getaway would help them reconnect. He remembered Jessica once mentioning a small town by a lake where they could rent a cabin. She liked to walk there, sit by the water, and talk about books. Michael found a website with cozy cottages and booked one for the following weekend. He imagined them sitting by the fireplace, her smiling at him like she used to. This was what they needed, he decided. He texted Jessica, "I have an idea for the weekend. A surprise. Can you make it?" He hoped she would answer quickly, but the phone was silent. Michael leaned back in his chair, looking at the photo on the refrigerator, him and Jessica in the park, her arm around him. He wanted to believe that everything would be okay, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. That evening, Jessica arrived at Michael's. He was cooking dinner, seafood pasta, her favorite. She walked in holding a bottle of wine and smiling, but her smile seemed forced. "Hi," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "It smells delicious." "I'm trying," Michael replied, trying to hide his anxiety. "How's the day?" "It's normal," she said, sitting down at the table. "Lectures, students, a lot of paperwork. The usual routine." Her phone vibrated, and she quickly grabbed it, looking at the screen. Michael saw her fingers pause, and then she tapped the screen as if deleting something. He walked into the kitchen with the plates, trying not to show what he had seen. "Is everything okay?" he asked, placing the pasta in front of her. "Yeah, just spam," she replied, putting the phone in her bag. "How's your day?" Michael started to talk about the project, about how the client was changing plans again, but his thoughts were occupied by her gesture. Why had she put her phone away so quickly? What was she hiding? He brushed those thoughts aside, focusing on dinner. "I was thinking about going away," he said when they had finished eating. "For the weekend. Lake. Remember, you told me about that place?" Jessica looked at him, her eyes widening. "A trip?" she asked. "Michael, that's sweet, but I have a lot of work. I don't know if I can do it." "It's just for a couple of days," he said, trying not to show his disappointment. "We need time together, Jess. I miss you." She nodded, but her gaze was absent. "I'll think about it," she said. "I promise." They finished dinner, but the conversation was strained. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and the 15th floor was silent, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Only a floor lamp was on in the living room, casting a soft light on the couch where Jessica's bag lay. She was in the bedroom, already asleep, citing fatigue from a long day at college. Michael held a glass of whiskey in his hand, but he didn't drink, just twirling it in his fingers as if it would calm his thoughts. Her refusal to go away for the weekend still echoed in his head. "I have a lot of work, Michael. I don't know if I can do it." He tried to understand her, the new position, the lectures, the students. But something in her voice, in her evasive gaze, struck at old wounds. He had lived through it with Elizabeth. First the excuses, then the coldness, then the truth that had torn his life apart. Michael had promised himself he would never be blind again. But now, looking at Jessica's bag, he felt his doubts taking over. He finished his whiskey in one gulp and set the glass down on the table. Jessica was asleep, her phone in her bag. He'd seen her throw it there when she'd walked in. Michael hated the thought of checking it. It was beneath him, something he'd sworn never to do again. But her distance, her short messages, her constant, "I'm busy," it all added up to a pattern he couldn't ignore. He went to his bag and pulled out his phone, the screen locked. The password was her birthday. He knew it because she'd once told him, laughing at how predictable it was. He punched in the code, and the screen lit up. Michael opened the messages, and there were the usual chats. Coworkers, a friend named Linda, a few students asking about assignments. But one name stood out. TB, the last message sent that evening. You were amazing today. Until tomorrow. Michael felt his throat tighten. He scrolled up, but the previous messages had been deleted, as if someone or she had made sure they were gone. Oh God, not again, he thought, his heart pounding. He put the phone back in his bag, trying to be quiet. Jessica was asleep in the next room, and he didn't want her to catch him. He walked back to the window, his hands shaking. TB, who is this? A coworker? A student? Someone she stays late at work with? He tried to remember if she'd mentioned anyone with those initials, but nothing came to mind. Michael sat down on the couch, burying his face in his hands. He felt betrayed, even though he didn't know the truth yet. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was just a friendly text. But the word amazing was spinning around in his head like a knife. He knew he couldn't just ask her not now, not without proof. He had to be sure, or he risked ruining everything they had. Jessica woke up before Michael that morning. She was standing in the kitchen, making coffee, when he walked in. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she looked cozy in his old t-shirt, almost like she used to. But Michael couldn't shake the image of that text, the feeling of her slipping away. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "Did you go to bed late last night?" "Yes," he answered, trying to keep his voice even. "I was thinking about work." She nodded, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "You're always thinking about work," she said, handing him the cup. "Maybe you should take a day off, go somewhere." Her words surprised him. It had been his idea, the trip, and she had refused. Now she was proposing it herself. He looked at her, trying to understand what was behind her smile. "I suggested a ride," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "You said you were busy." Jessica hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Yeah, I know," she said. "It's just, everything's so crazy right now. New semester, students, meetings. But I'll think about it, I promise." "Okay," Michael said, but his voice was colder than he intended. "Let me know." She looked at him, her brows furrowing slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look, I don't know, tense." "Just tired," he replied, looking away. "Lots of work." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on him a little too long. Michael felt a twinge of guilt. She had noticed his coldness, but he couldn't pretend that everything was okay. Not after that text. Jessica left for work, kissing him on the cheek. When the door closed, Michael pulled out his phone and opened a browser. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he started with the website of the college where Jessica worked. Maybe there was something about teachers whose initials were TB. He scrolled through the department list, but found nothing. Then he went to social media, typing in the name of the college. Among the posts about events and student clubs, he came across an album of photos from a recent faculty meeting. He clicked on it, scrolling through pictures of smiling people with glasses of wine. And then he saw her, Jessica, in a green blazer, standing next to a man. He was tall, with dark hair and a neat beard, his hand on the back of her chair. They were laughing, and her face lit up in a way it hadn't in a long time around his. The caption read, "Humanities Faculty at Annual Meeting. Jessica Lake and Thomas Brady." Michael froze. Thomas Brady. TB, his heart sank so hard he could barely breathe. He enlarged the photo, looking at their faces. It wasn't proof, he told himself. It was just a photo. But something about the way they stood, the way she looked at him, said more than he wanted to know. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Oh God, not again," he thought, the words echoing in his head. He remembered Elizabeth, her smiles, her excuses, her lies. He wouldn't live through that again. But he couldn't just blame Jessica, not without proof. He had to be sure. Jessica walked across campus, her heels clicking on the cobblestone path. It was a clear morning, but she barely noticed the sun or the laughter of students hurrying to class. Her mind was on the night before her kiss with Thomas, their walk in the park, his text message that she'd deleted so Michael wouldn't see. She felt torn in two. Part of her wanted to stop, to go back to Michael, to their stable, warm life. The other part, the part that woke up next to Thomas, wanted more excitement, passion, the feeling that she was still alive. She walked into her office, throwing her bag on a chair. She had 2 classes today, but her mind was far from Shakespeare. She pulled out her phone and opened the chat with Thomas. His last message was still there. "You were amazing today, until tomorrow." She smiled, but then felt a pang of guilt. Michael had been strange this morning, cold, distant. He had always been sensitive, and she knew he noticed her changes. But she couldn't tell him the truth. Not now. There was a knock at the door, and she quickly put the phone away. Thomas walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning," he said, his voice light but his eyes intent. "Vanilla latte, just the way you like it." "Thank you," Jessica replied, taking the cup. "You're early today." "I wanted to catch you before the lectures," he said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "How are you after yesterday?" She looked at him, her heart beating faster. His presence, his closeness, it was all too much. She wanted to tell him it was a mistake, that they should stop, but instead she smiled. "I'm fine," she said. "And you?" "Better than usual," he replied with a wink. "But we must be careful. No one must know." "I know," she nodded, her voice becoming quieter. I don't want problems." "They won't be," he said, touching her hand, "if we're smart." His touch was light, but it burned through her. She nodded, but her mind was in turmoil. She knew this wasn't just flirting, this wasn't just coffee. This was something that could ruin everything: her relationship with Michael, her reputation, her very self. But she couldn't stop. "See you later?" Thomas asked, standing up. "Yes," she answered, trying to sound confident. "After the lectures." He left, and Jessica was alone. She opened her laptop, trying to focus on the lecture plan, but her thoughts kept returning to Michael. She knew he was planning the trip, that he was trying to do something for her. But the thought of spending the weekend with him terrified her. She wasn't sure she could pretend everything was okay when her mind was elsewhere. Michael spent the day at the office, but his mind was far from work. The photo of Jessica and Thomas kept popping into his head. He tried to convince himself that it didn't matter, just colleagues, just smiling for a photo. But the text from TB told a different story. He decided he wouldn't act impulsively. He would gather more evidence, talk to her, but not now. He didn't want to destroy their relationship because of suspicions. That evening, he texted Jessica, "How's your day? Want to see you today." He hoped she'd agree, that her smile, her voice, would give him confidence. But her response came an hour later. "Crazy day. Maybe tomorrow? Tired." Michael read the message and felt his heart squeeze. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened his laptop and looked at the photo again. Jessica and Thomas, their smiles, their closeness. He closed his laptop and lay down on the couch, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let this happen again. Not again. Michael Watson sped down the highway to the college where Jessica worked. It was about 3 in the afternoon, and the sun was high, but his mind was dark. He had been awake most of the night. He tried to convince himself that he was wrong, that it was just his imagination, but the doubts had grown into a certainty he could no longer ignore. This morning, he texted Jessica, "Going to be busy all day, but can I see you tonight?" She responded quickly, "Okay, I'm at school until 6. Call me." Her answer seemed normal, but Michael couldn't help but think she was lying. He knew her schedule. She didn't have classes after 2. Why was she staying until 6? He hadn't planned on going to school, but after another hour in the office, staring at blueprints he couldn't see, he snapped. He needed the truth. Now. He pulled into the college parking lot, his heart pounding like a drum. The campus was bustling, students sitting on the lawns, professors walking with folders in their hands. Michael headed toward the humanities building, where Jessica's office was. He never showed up here unannounced, and now, walking down the cobblestone path, he felt like an outsider. His dark shirt was slightly wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, but he didn't care. He had to see her. He had to be sure. Entering the building, he went up to the second floor, where the literature department was located. The corridor was quiet, only the voice of a professor could be heard from one classroom. Michael stopped in front of a door with a sign, Jessica Lake, Literature Professor. He knocked, but no one answered. His hand froze over the handle. What was he doing? Maybe she was in a meeting, or in the library, or... But he turned the handle, and the door opened. What he saw was like a punch to the chest. Jessica was standing at the table, her arms wrapped around the neck of a man Thomas Brady, the one from the photograph. They were so close they didn't even notice him at first. Thomas had his arm around her waist, their faces inches apart, and Jessica was laughing, her eyes shining. Michael felt his heart break. This wasn't just suspicion, this wasn't just fear. This was the truth, and it was worse than he could have imagined. Will Michael be able to get his broken heart back, or will Jessica's betrayal be the point of no return? Like If You Believe the Truth always comes out, and subscribe to stay up to date with the next exciting stories. Jessica, he said, his voice hoarse, almost alien. She flinched, pulling away from Thomas so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair. Her face went pale, her eyes wide. Michael, she breathed, her voice shaking. What are you? What are you doing here? Thomas stepped back, his face calm but his eyes darting around, assessing the situation. He straightened his jacket and cleared his throat, as if that would smooth the moment over. I'll go, he said quietly, heading towards the door. No, stop, Michael barked, his voice full of fury. You're not going anywhere. But Thomas didn't stop. He walked past Michael without looking him in the eye and disappeared down the hallway. Michael wanted to grab him, but his anger was directed at Jessica. She stood in front of him, her hands nervously fiddling with the hem of her blouse, her face a mixture of horror and guilt. Michael, listen, she began, her voice high, almost pleading. It's not what you think. We're just. Not what I think, he interrupted, stepping closer. His fists clenched, but he kept his composure. I saw you, Jessica. You were hugging him. You were laughing. Don't lie to me. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Her eyes filled with tears, but Michael felt no pity. He felt only pain, the same pain that tore through him when he learned of Elizabeth's betrayal. It was like déjà vu, like a nightmare he couldn't stop. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice quieter but still steely. Weeks, months, since you started working here. No, she said, shaking her head. It's just starting. Michael, I swear, it's not. Don't swear, he snapped. I saw the text. TBH, you were amazing. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I won't notice how distant you are, how you lie? Jessica covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. She was crying, but Michael couldn't bring himself to go to her. He remembered their anniversary, her smile, her words about being happy. It was all a lie. I thought you were different, he said, his voice breaking on the last word. I thought you were someone I could trust. After everything I've been through, I opened my heart to you. And you're making me go through that pain again. Michael, please, she said, dropping her hands. Her face was wet with tears. I didn't mean to. I'm confused. I don't know how this happened. Please let me explain. Explain? He almost shouted, but then lowered his voice, noticing that the door was open. Explain what? That you kissed him because you were confused? That you lied to me because you were bored? It's not like that, she said, stepping toward him. I love you, Michael. I really do. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. He stepped back as if her words might burn him. Do you love me? He said, his voice full of bitterness. You call this love? Lies, secrets, another man? I don't know who you are, Jessica, but you're not who I thought you were. She froze, her arms hanging by her sides. She wanted to say something, but Michael raised his hand, stopping her. It's over, he said. We're over. I can't do this. Not again. Michael, no, she breathed, her voice full of desperation. Please don't go. We can fix this. I will fix this. He looked at her, and for a second he wanted to believe. But the image of her and Thomas, their closeness, their laughter, all of it stood before his eyes like a wall he couldn't get past. "I thought you were different," he repeated quietly, and these words were the hardest of all. "Goodbye, Jessica." He turned and walked out without looking back, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He heard her calling his name, but he didn't stop. As he stepped outside, the sun blinded him, and he closed his eyes, feeling the tears sting his eyelids. He hadn't cried since Elizabeth had left, but the pain was fresh now, sharp as a knife. Jessica remained in the office, her knees buckling as she slumped into her chair. Her hands were shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she made no attempt to wipe them away. Michael was gone, his words, "I thought you were different," echoing in her head. She knew she was to blame, she knew she had ruined everything, but the reality of it was too much to bear. She remembered how it had all started: coffee with Thomas, his smiles, their conversations. She had wanted nothing more than to feel alive, but now she had lost Michael, the man who had truly loved her. She looked at the table where her phone lay and thought of Thomas. He had left without a word, leaving her to deal with this alone. Her anger at him mixed with her anger at herself. She picked up her phone, her fingers shaking as she opened the chat with Thomas. The last message was from him. "Are you free after 3? Come over to my place." She wanted to text him, to blame him, to ask why he'd run away, but instead she just blocked his number. It wouldn't fix what she'd done, but it was something. Jessica sat in silence, her cries growing quieter. She knew she had to do something: apologize, explain, try to get Michael back. But the look in his eyes, full of pain and disappointment, told her this was the end. She had destroyed not only their relationship, but herself. Michael drove back to town, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. He didn't know where he was going. He just wanted to be as far away from college, from Jessica, from this nightmare as possible. His phone was on the passenger seat, but he didn't look at it. He knew she might call, text, but he wasn't ready to listen. Not now, maybe never. He stopped at a traffic light and closed his eyes. The image of Jessica with Thomas was still in his mind, and he felt his heart breaking. He trusted her, loved her, made plans with her, and she chose someone else, like Elizabeth, just like when his world collapsed. But there was something new in the pain too: determination. He wouldn't let this break him again. He would survive this, just like he had survived the divorce. But now he needed time to breathe, to figure out how to move on. When the traffic light turned green, Michael hit the gas. Michael Watson sat on the couch in his apartment, staring at the empty glass in his hand. A bottle of whiskey, half empty, sat on the coffee table next to a frame he hadn't yet put away: a photograph of him and Jessica on the beach. Her smile in the picture seemed mocking, a lie he'd swallowed. The lights in the living room were off, only the city lights outside his 15th-story window casting a cold glow on the walls. It was nearly midnight, but sleep was as far away as peace. It had been a day since he'd found Jessica and Thomas in her office. The image of them together, her arms around his neck, their laughter was burning inside him. He couldn't get it out of his head, no matter how hard he tried. After he'd dropped out of college, he'd driven around town until he'd run out of gas. He didn't want to go home, didn't want to see her things, her smell, her traces in his life. But here he was, alone, with whiskey and a pain that was all too familiar. Michael poured himself another drink, his movements slow, almost mechanical. He wasn't a drinker, but today he needed something to drown out his thoughts. Why had this happened again? Why had he chosen another woman who would betray him? Elizabeth, now Jessica, what was wrong with him? He was a successful architect, his designs changing the face of the city, but in his personal life he was a failure, a blind idiot who trusted the wrong people. "It's your own fault," he muttered, looking into his glass. "You should have seen it." He remembered their anniversary, her evasive answers, her distance. He thought it was work, that she was just tired. How could he have been so naive? He had given her everything: his heart, his trust, his future. And she had chosen someone else. Michael squeezed his glass so hard it almost cracked. He set it down on the table and buried his face in his hands. His phone lay next to him, the screen flickering with missed calls. Jessica had called 3 times, leaving 2 messages. "Michael, please talk to me," and "I know I'm wrong, let me explain." He didn't answer. What could she explain? That she was confused? That it means nothing? He'd heard these excuses from Elizabeth, and they were as empty as her promises. He didn't want to hear Jessica's voice, didn't want to see her tears. He just wanted to forget. Michael stood up, his legs heavy, as if he were carrying the weight of the world. He walked to the window, looking out at the city that never slept. He thought about starting over, about picking himself up again. But now he saw no way forward. Only pain, anger, and the question that haunted him. Why him? Jessica Lake sat in a cafe on the campus square, across from Thomas Brady. It was the next morning, and the cafe was buzzing with students, but their corner table was an island of silence. Jessica held her latte, but didn't drink it, her fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of her napkin. She hadn't slept the night before, and her eyes were red from crying, but she'd put on makeup to hide the marks. She needed to look strong, even though she was falling apart inside. After Michael left her office, she felt empty, as if someone had ripped out a piece of her soul. His words, "I thought you were different," were like a knife she'd stabbed herself. She knew she'd earned his anger, but that didn't make it hurt any less. She'd lost him, the man who'd looked at her with such love, with such faith. And now, sitting across from Thomas, she was searching for something confirmation that she was still needed, that she wasn't alone. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked, his voice soft but lacking the warmth she was used to. He looked at her, but his gaze was wary, almost distant. "No," she answered honestly, her voice shaking. I don't know how to fix this. Michael, he saw everything. He's gone." Thomas nodded, sipping his coffee. His face was calm, too calm, and it scared her. "It's bad," he said. "But Jessica, you knew this could happen. We both did." "You ran away," she said, her voice sharpening. "You just walked away, left me to deal with it." He raised his eyebrows as if her words surprised him. "What was I supposed to do?" he asked. "Fight? Tell him we were just colleagues? He saw us, Jessica. It wasn't my fault." She looked at him, her eyes narrowed. She wanted to scream, to blame him, but she knew he was right. It was her fault. She had let this happen. She had kissed him. She had lied to Michael. But Thomas, he had been a part of this, and his coldness had hurt her. "What now?" she asked, her voice quieter. "What do we do?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against his cup. "We'll go on," he said. "But be careful. No one else can know. It's been fun, Jessica, but we can't take any chances." "Fun?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You call this fun?" He looked at her. His eyes were serious, but there was no warmth in them. "What's this?" he said. "We both got what we wanted. You didn't think this was serious, did you?" Her heart sank. She looked at him, trying to find something in his face that would refute his words, but all she saw was his usual mocking smile. He didn't love her. He didn't care about her. She was entertainment for him, a game, and she had ruined her life for this. "I thought," she began, but stopped. She couldn't say what she thought. That she hoped he would see her as more than just a fling. That he would give her what she so desperately needed, a feeling of being important. "Jessica," he said, leaning closer. "You're amazing. You really are. But I have a life. You had yours. We were just enjoying the moment." She nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to leave, but her legs wouldn't move. She felt used, stupid, alone. Her fear of loneliness, which she had always hidden, was now real, tangible. She had lost Michael and Thomas. Thomas had never been hers. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "I have a lecture." "See you later?" he asked, his voice light, as if nothing had happened. "Maybe," she answered, but her voice was empty. She walked out of the cafe, her steps fast, almost running. She didn't want him to see her tears. She didn't want anyone to see her falling apart. Michael walked into a bar a few blocks from his house. The rusty anchor was old, with scuffed wooden tables and the smell of beer lingering on the walls. It was loud laughter, glasses clinking, music playing on an old jukebox. Michael rarely came here, but today he needed a place to drown his thoughts. He sat down at the bar, ordering a whiskey and soda. The bartender, an older man with an anchor tattoo on his forearm, nodded and placed the glass in front of him. "Rough day?" he asked, wiping down the counter. "It's been a tough year," Michael replied, taking a sip. The bartender chuckled, but didn't ask. Michael was grateful for that. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to explain. He just wanted to forget Jessica's face, her voice, her lies. But every sip only intensified the pain instead of dulling it. Next to him sat a man Michael recognized as Paul, an engineer from his firm with whom he sometimes crossed paths on projects. Paul was a loudmouth with a habit of cracking jokes, even at the most inappropriate moments. "Michael Watson himself," Paul said, clapping him on the shoulder. "What are you doing in this dump? Where's your hottie?" Michael tensed, his fingers tightening around the glass. "We broke up," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Paul fell silent, his smile disappearing. "Shit, man, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know. What happened?" Michael looked at him, his eyes tired. "She found someone better," he said, his voice full of bitterness. "As usual." Paul shook his head as he ordered a beer. "That's crap," he said. "But you know what? You're better than that. She's not worth your time." Michael nodded, but Paul's words didn't help. He knew he had to move on, but now he felt empty, like someone had ripped out his heart. He finished his whiskey and ordered another. "Why do I always pick on people like that?" he asked, more to himself than to Paul. "Elizabeth, now Jessica. What's wrong with me?" Paul looked at him, his face becoming more serious. "There's nothing wrong with you," he said. "You just trust people. It's not a weakness, Michael. It's just bad luck." Michael chuckled, but his eyes were empty. He didn't believe in bad luck. He believed that he was doing something wrong, that he was blind, that he couldn't see the truth until it crushed him. "I thought she was different," he said quietly. "I thought she loved me." Paul put his hand on his shoulder. "She's not worth your tears," he said. "You'll find someone better. Give yourself time." Michael nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He finished his whiskey and stood up, throwing money on the counter. "I'm going home," he said. "Thank you, Paul." "Take care," Paul replied, watching him go. Michael stepped outside. The night air was cool, but not refreshing. He walked toward his apartment, his steps heavy. When he entered the house, he looked at the photograph on the table. Jessica was smiling, her eyes shining. He picked up the frame and threw it hard into the trash can. The glass cracked, but he didn't care. He lay down on the couch, still dressed, and closed his eyes. He knew he had to move on, but all he could feel now was pain. And in that pain, he swore to himself that he would never allow himself to love so blindly again. Jessica walked back into her apartment, her hands shaking as she opened the door. She dropped her bag on the floor and sat on the couch, hugging herself. Thomas's words, "It was fun," swirled around in her head like poison. She felt stupid, used, but most of all, alone. She had lost Michael and Thomas. Thomas had never been hers. She was an adventure to him, and she ruined her life for this. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Michael's name. She wanted to call, to beg, to explain, but she knew he wouldn't answer. She opened their old texts, reading his words. "I miss you. You make me happy." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she threw the phone on the couch. She was afraid of being alone, afraid that without someone's love, she would disappear. And now that fear has become reality, she lay curled up and cried herself to sleep, her thoughts full of pain and regret. Sarah Brady stood at the stove in her spacious home, stirring pasta sauce. The aroma of basil and tomatoes filled the kitchen, mingling with the soft light of the morning sun streaming through the large windows. The Brady home, a two-story mansion in a quiet suburb, was their pride and joy, with a manicured garden, a white picket fence, and a cozy porch where she and Thomas often drank coffee on weekends. Today was a typical Thursday, and Sarah was cooking dinner, humming a tune she heard on the radio. She was 44, but her energy and smile made her seem younger, almost girlish. Sarah was a psychologist at the college where her husband, Thomas, taught. She loved her job helping students, understanding their fears, guiding them. Her life seemed perfect to her. A strong marriage, a profession she loved, the house she had dreamed of since childhood. She had grown up in a wealthy family where she was pampered, but she had never felt spoiled. On the contrary, she wanted to give, to share, to make the world a better place. Thomas was her rock, her other half. They had been together for almost 20 years, and although the passion of their youth had died down, a deep, reliable love had taken its place, or so she thought. "Good morning, dear," Thomas said, entering the kitchen. He was wearing a blue jacket, his hair was neatly combed, and his beard was trimmed. He looked, as always, impeccable. "Good," Sarah replied, smiling. "The coffee is ready, your cup is on the table." He kissed her cheek, his hand lingering for a moment on her waist. Sarah felt warmth from the gesture, familiar but still pleasant. "You're early today," she remarked, transferring the bacon to her plate. "Lectures in the morning?" "Yeah, and a department meeting," Thomas said, sitting down at his desk. He picked up his phone, his fingers swiping across the screen, and he frowned as if deleting something. "How's your day?" "Full," Sarah said, setting his breakfast plate in front of him. "I have 3 tutorials, plus I have to prepare materials for the seminar. But I'm excited. A student told me yesterday how afraid she was of failing her exams. We sorted it out, and she left with a smile. It's worth it." Thomas nodded, his gaze absent-minded, but he smiled. "You always save the world," he said, sipping his coffee. "I couldn't stand to talk so much about other people's problems." "They're not problems," Sarah countered, sitting down across from him. "They're people. They just need to be heard." He chuckled, but his eyes slid back to the phone. Sarah noticed, but didn't pay attention. Thomas was always busy lectures, articles, conferences. She got used to his absent-mindedness, blaming it on work. "Are you home tonight?" she asked. "I thought we could watch that movie you were talking about." "Maybe," he said, standing up. "I have a couple of meetings after class, but I'll try. Don't wait until I'm late." "Okay," Sarah nodded, her voice light. "But I'll leave you some pasta. Don't disappear for too long." He smiled, picked up his briefcase, and left, saying, "I love you." Sarah watched him go, feeling the familiar warmth. She didn't doubt his words and didn't doubt their marriage. To her, Thomas was as reliable as this house, as her life. In the college counseling center, Sarah sat in her office, small but cozy, with a plush couch, a plant in the corner, and a shelf of psychology books. Her diplomas hung on the wall, and on her desk was a photograph of her and Thomas on their 15th anniversary, smiling against the sunset. Sarah loved the picture. It reminded her of how far they had come together. Her first consultation was with a freshman who was worried about not living up to his parents' expectations. Sarah listened, asked questions, and helped him see his strengths. She was in her element, her voice warm, her smile reassuring. After the student came Jessica Lake, a literature professor whom Sarah knew as a colleague. Jessica had booked an appointment that morning, and Sarah was happy to help. She had heard that Jessica was new and might be stressed. Jessica walked in, her dark hair pulled back into a bun, but with a few strands hanging out and shadows under her eyes. She sat down on the couch, her hands clutching her bag nervously. "Thank you for having me," Jessica said, her voice quiet. I just need someone to talk to." "Of course," Sarah replied, smiling. "I'm here to listen. What's going on?" Jessica looked at the floor, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her bag. "It's complicated," she began. "I'm having relationship problems. I did something stupid, and now everything's falling apart." Sarah nodded, her face open and non-judgmental. "Tell me if you want," she said. "Sometimes it helps just to talk." Jessica swallowed, her eyes shining, but she held back the tears. I was with someone, she said, her voice almost a whisper. The person I love. But I let myself get carried away by someone else, and he found out. Now he doesn't want to see me. Sarah listened, her heart aching with sympathy. She could see Jessica struggling with herself, her voice shaking with guilt. It's hard, Sarah said softly. You feel guilty, don't you? Yeah, Jessica nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean to hurt him. I love him. But I don't know why I did it. I just wanted to feel needed. Sarah leaned a little closer, her voice calm but firm. Sometimes we do things that don't reflect who we are, she said. We're looking for something validation, attention, but that doesn't mean we're bad. It means we're human. What do you want now? To fix it. Jessica shook her head, her tears finally starting to flow. I don't know if it can be fixed, she said. He said it was over, and I don't blame him. Sarah handed her a box of tissues, her eyes full of understanding. Give yourself time, she said. And him too. Sometimes people say things in anger, but that's not always the end. If you want to fight for this relationship, start by being honest with him and with yourself. Jessica nodded, wiping away her tears. Thank you, she said. I didn't expect it to help, but thank you. You can always come, Sarah replied, smiling. We'll figure it out together. After Jessica left, Sarah made a note in her notebook. She felt sorry for Jessica. She could see her suffering, her guilt eating away at her. Sarah thought of her marriage to Thomas and smiled. She was grateful for their stability, for their love. She never had to doubt him, and that was her strength. That evening, Sarah returned home carrying a bag of groceries. Thomas was already there, sitting in the living room with his laptop. His phone was lying nearby, and he quickly put it away when she entered. Hi, she said, setting the bag on the table. I bought everything for lasagna. Want to help? Maybe later, he replied, without looking up from the screen. I need to finish the article. Sarah nodded, used to his busy schedule. She began to unpack the groceries, humming the same tune she had that morning. You know, I had an interesting consultation today, she said, chopping onions. The new teacher, Jessica. She's so sweet, but she's having relationship problems. Did something she regrets. Reminded me how important it is to be honest with each other. Thomas froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He looked at her, his face calm, but his eyes slightly worried. Jessica, he asked, his voice even. What did she say? Nothing specific, Sarah said, not noticing his tension. Just about the mistake, about the other person. I told her that honesty is key, like with you and me. We're always open, right? True, Thomas said, his smile strained. You're right, as always. Sarah smiled as she continued cooking. She didn't see Thomas pick up his phone and quickly delete a few messages, his fingers moving with practiced speed. He stood up, walked over to her, and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. You're amazing, he said, his voice warm but with something in it that Sarah didn't catch. You're a sycophant, she laughed, turning and kissing him. Go finish your article. Dinner's soon. Thomas turned back to his laptop, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew he had to be careful. Jessica had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, but he wasn't going to lose Sarah. Not over this. He deleted another message from Jessica's message that came in the afternoon. We need to talk. He didn't answer. He needed time to sort things out. Sarah cooked dinner, humming and thinking about how lucky she was. She didn't notice Thomas looking at her, not with love, but with calculation. She didn't notice her perfect world falling apart. Everything was fine for her, and she wanted it to stay that way. Jessica Lake sat on the edge of her hotel bed, her hands fiddling with the edge of the sheets. The room was small, with beige walls and a view of a city street where the lights of cars flashed by. It was about 8 o'clock, and the dim light from the desk lamp cast shadows across her face. Thomas Brady stood by the window, his jacket thrown over a chair, his shirt slightly unbuttoned. They had met here an hour ago under the pretext of talking, but the conversation had quickly turned to familiar intimacy. Now, afterward, Jessica felt an emptiness that grew with each encounter. It had been a week since Michael had walked in on her with Thomas and left, ending their relationship. Since then, she had tried to drown her guilt in Thomas, in his attention, in his words that had once made her heart beat faster. But he had changed, or maybe she was just starting to see the real him. His smiles were less frequent, his texts shorter, their meetings more mechanical. Today he had come later than he had promised, and even now, standing by the window, he seemed distant, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked, her voice quiet, almost unsure. She smoothed her hair back from falling over her shoulders and pulled her sweater up, feeling vulnerable. Thomas turned, his eyes sliding over her, but there was no sparkle in them as before. "Yeah," he said with a shrug, "just tired. Long day." She nodded, but his answer did not reassure her. She had noticed it before his distance, his evasive answers. Her fear of loneliness, which she had tried to drown out with their affair, was now returning, stronger than ever. "Thomas," she began, her voice firmer. "What's going on? You're barely talking to me. If something's wrong, tell me." He looked at her, his eyebrows slightly raised, as if her question had surprised him. Then he sat down on the chair opposite the bed, his movements slow, almost lazy. "Nothing's happening," he said, but his voice was too even. "We're just doing what we're doing, aren't we?" Jessica felt her throat tighten. His words were like a blow, casual, cold, as if everything between them had been a game in which she was merely a participant, not a partner. "Is that all this is to you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Just doing what we do. I lost everything, Thomas. Michael left. I ruined my life for this. And you talk like it means nothing." Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples as if her words were a burden to him. "Jessica, look," he said, leaning forward. "You knew what you were getting into. I'm married. I have Sarah. I never promised you anything more." Her heart sank. She knew he was married, she'd seen his ring, she'd heard his cautious words. But she'd allowed herself to believe that he felt something more, that their connection was more than just a fling. Now his words crushed that illusion. "You never intended to leave her," she said, her voice full of bitterness. "All this time, you were just having fun." "Not like that," he said, his voice sharpening. "I was with you because I like you. You're smart, beautiful, interesting. But I can't give it all up for what? For a few weeks of passion. It doesn't work like that." Jessica stood up, her hands clenched into fists. She felt anger and pain fighting inside her, but anger won. "A few weeks of passion," she repeated, her voice growing louder. "I lost the man who loved me for you. I lied, I betrayed, I hate myself for it. And you were just playing." Thomas stood up, his face tense, but he didn't back down. "You made a choice, Jessica," he said, his voice cold. "Don't blame me for it. You wanted this as much as I did. Don't pretend I forced you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She looked at him, at his calm face, at his confident posture, and she knew he was right. She had made a choice. She had allowed herself to be carried away because she was afraid of loneliness, because she wanted to feel wanted. But now she saw that he had never been her salvation, he had been her mistake. "Go away," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "This is the end." Thomas looked at her, his eyebrows raised. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Just like that?" "Go away," she repeated, her voice growing louder. "I don't want to see you. Ever." He nodded, as if accepting her words, and picked up his jacket. "As you say," he said, heading for the door. "Take care, Jessica." When the door closed behind him, Jessica sank down on the bed, her body shaking. She was crying, but not from the pain of losing Thomas, but from the pain of knowing that she had destroyed herself. She thought of Michael, of the look in his eyes, full of disappointment, of his words, "I thought you were different." She had hurt him, the same pain she was feeling now, and it was unbearable. Jessica returned to her apartment late that night. Her small living room was littered with books and unwashed dishes, reflecting the chaos of her life. She threw her bag on the couch and sat with her arms wrapped around herself. Her phone was on the table, and she knew there were no messages from Michael he hadn't texted since the day he left. But there was one from Thomas. "If you change your mind, text me." She picked up the phone, her fingers shaking as she opened his contact list. She wanted to text, to blame him, to beg him to prove she wasn't just a game. But instead, she hit delete contact. The screen flickered and his number disappeared. It wasn't salvation, but it was a step toward self-reflection, not self-destruction. She opened her laptop and began searching for therapists in town. Her consultation with Sarah had helped, but she knew she needed someone who wasn't connected to the college, who didn't know Thomas, who wouldn't be part of her mistakes. She found a clinic with good reviews and made an appointment for the following week. It was scary, admitting that she needed help, that she couldn't cope. But she was tired of pretending to be strong. Jessica lay down on the couch, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She thought about Michael, the way he looked at her when they were happy. She remembered their walks, his jokes, his offer to move in. She had ruined it, and now she had to live with it. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope, not that he would come back, but that she could understand herself, her fears, her mistakes. Michael Watson sat in his office, surrounded by blueprints and sketches. It was morning, and his team was preparing to present a new project, a skyscraper that would become the city's calling card. He was focused, his pencil moving across the paper, marking changes to the design. It had been a week since he had left Jessica, and although the pain was still there, it had become quieter, like background noise. Work was his salvation. He would arrive at the office early, leave late, immersing himself in drawings, meetings, calculations. It didn't take away the pain, but it gave him a purpose, something he could control. His colleagues noticed that he was quieter, but no one asked. Only David, his friend, would occasionally drop by to check on him. "You look smart," David said, walking into the office with 2 cups of coffee. "You don't look like you've been run over by a truck." "Thank you for the compliment," Michael replied, accepting the cup. His voice was dry, but the corner of his lips twitched into a smile. "Seriously," David said, sitting up. "Are you okay? I mean, after everything." Michael looked at him, his eyes tired but clear. "Not really," he said honestly, "but I cope. Work helps." "That's good," David nodded. "Just don't get too deep into it, okay? You deserve more than blueprints and whiskey." Michael nodded, but his mind was busy. He knew David was right, but right now, work was the only thing keeping him going. He wasn't ready to think about the future, about new relationships, about love. He just wanted to feel like himself again, a person who could trust, who could live without the fear of betrayal. "How's the project?" he asked, changing the subject. David grinned, taking the hint, and began to explain the latest changes. Michael listened, taking notes, and for the first time in a week, he felt a little relieved. He wasn't whole, but he was getting there. And that was enough. Jessica sat in her apartment, her laptop open to her therapist's website. She wrote down her thoughts in a notebook about her fear of being alone, her need for validation, the pain she had caused Michael. It was hard, almost unbearable, but she knew she had to do it. She didn't want to be the one who was destroyed, neither others nor herself. She closed her laptop and looked at the photo on the shelf, her and Michael in the park, their hands intertwined. She didn't put it away, even though she knew she should. It was a reminder not of what she'd lost, but of what she needed to fix about herself. She picked up her phone and blocked all the old messages from Thomas that she hadn't already deleted. It was a small step, but it was hers. Michael Watson sat at his desk in his office, looking over the sketches of a new project. His office on the 23rd floor was bathed in morning light, reflecting off the glass walls. The plans for the skyscraper that would be his most ambitious project lay before him, but his gaze kept drifting to his computer screen, where a new email had opened. From Jessica Lake. Subject: I'm sorry. It had been 6 months since he'd found her with Thomas Brady in her office. 6 months since he'd told her it was over and walked away, leaving their relationship and his belief in love behind. They had been tough months, but he persevered. His work had become his anchor. He'd thrown himself into projects, taken on overtime, met with clients until the pain had faded to background noise. He wasn't the same Michael, but he was stronger, more careful, with armor he wasn't about to take off. He hadn't expected a letter from Jessica. She'd called a few times since their breakup, texted him, but he hadn't answered, and eventually she'd stopped. He'd thought she was gone from his life forever. Now her name on the screen stirred a mixture of anger, curiosity, and something he didn't want to name: longing. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the mouse. He could delete the letter without reading it, and continue on as if she'd never existed. But something, maybe weakness, maybe hope, made him click. Michael, I know you don't want to hear me, and I don't blame you. I hurt you, and I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. I'm not writing to make excuses. I have no excuses. I'm writing to say I'm sorry. I was selfish, I was weak, and I ruined what we had. I've been going to therapy for 5 months now. It's hard, but I'm learning to understand why I did what I did. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of not being good enough. That doesn't excuse me, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for you, but for me. I don't expect you to forgive me. But if you agree to meet, just to talk, I'll be grateful. I want to tell you this in person. If not, I'll understand. Jessica. Michael read the letter twice, his face unmoving. She had spoken sincerely, but he couldn't forget her and Thomas, her lies, her betrayal. He closed the letter and leaned back in his chair, looking out at the city. Forgiveness, he wasn't sure he could do that. But curiosity, or perhaps a desire to close the chapter, tugged at him. What did she want? To show that she had changed, or simply to ease her conscience? He wrote a short reply: Bean Cafe on 5th, 3 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be there. He hit send before he could change his mind and went back to his drawings, but his mind was no longer on work. The next day, Michael walked into the Bean Cafe, a small place with wooden tables and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. It was 3 in the afternoon, and the place was almost empty, except for a couple of students sitting in the corner with their laptops. He chose a table by the window, away from the entrance, and ordered a black coffee. His fingers tapped the table, betraying the nervousness he was trying to hide. He hadn't seen Jessica since that day in college, and now, sitting here, he wondered if he'd made the right decision by agreeing. The door opened and Jessica walked in. She looked different. Her dark hair was shorter, cut into a neat bob, and instead of her usual bright dresses, she wore a simple sweater and jeans. Her face was paler than he remembered, and there were shadows under her eyes, but her eyes were the same, brown with gold flecks. She noticed him and smiled, but the smile was cautious, almost fragile. "Hello," she said, approaching the table. "Thank you for coming." "Hello," Michael replied, his voice even but controlled. "Have a seat." She sat down opposite him, her hands clutching her bag nervously. The waitress came over and Jessica ordered tea, her voice quiet but firm. When the waitress left, there was silence, heavy, as if there was a chasm between them. "You look good," Jessica said, looking at him. I'm glad you agreed to meet." Michael nodded, his fingers wrapping around his coffee cup. "I wasn't sure I'd come," he said honestly. "But your letter, it touched me. What do you want, Jessica?" She swallowed, her eyes dropping to the table. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Not in a letter, but in person. I know I ruined us, Michael. I know I hurt you. And I hate myself for it." He looked at her, his face unmoving, but inside he felt a storm. The anger he had suppressed for months warred with an empathy he did not want to acknowledge. She looked sincere, vulnerable, but he could not forget her with Thomas, her lies, her laughter. "Do you think an apology will fix everything?" he asked, his voice cold. "Do you think I can just forget how you betrayed me?" "No," she said quickly, her eyes meeting his. "I don't expect you to forget. I know I ruined us, but I'm trying to fix myself. I'm going to therapy. I'm working on why I did it. I was afraid that I wasn't worth anything, that I'd disappear if no one wanted me. That's not an excuse, but I want you to know. Michael was silent, his fingers tightening around his cup. Her words rang true, but he wasn't ready to accept them. He remembered their anniversary, her evasive answers, her phone, which she hid. He remembered Thomas, his cheeky smile, his quick departure. "Why now?" he asked. "Why 6 months later? Are you bored? Or is your affair with Thomas over?" Jessica flinched, her face turning even paler. "It's not," she began, but stopped, closing her eyes. "Thomas was a mistake. I ended things with him soon after you left. He never cared about me. It was empty. I realized that too late." Michael looked at her, trying to figure out if she was lying. Her voice was shaking, her hands were fiddling with the hem of her sweater, but her eyes were open, full of pain. He wanted to believe her, but his armor was too thick. "You expect me to forgive you?" he asked, his voice quieter but steely. "What am I going to say? It's okay, let's try again. After everything." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, that I understand what I did. If you never want to see me again, I'll accept that. But I had to try." The waitress brought the tea, and Jessica took the cup, her hands shaking. Michael looked at her, his thoughts reeling. He hated her for what she had done, but he couldn't deny that her words touched him. She wasn't asking for a second chance. She wasn't manipulating. She was just there, vulnerable, ready to take his wrath. "I don't know what to say," he said finally, his voice tired. "You broke my heart, Jessica. I trusted you, and you chose him. I don't know if I can ever let that go." "I know," she said, her eyes filling with tears, but not looking away. "I know I ruined us, but I'm trying to fix myself. Not for you, but because I don't want to be the one who hurts." Those words, "I know I ruined us, but I'm trying to fix myself," hit him harder than he expected. He saw her pain, her sincerity, and it tore him between anger and sympathy. He didn't want to forgive her, but he couldn't deny that her efforts meant something. But trust had been broken, and he wasn't sure it could be repaired. He leaned forward, his voice firmer. "If you're serious," he said, "if you really want to show that you've changed, prove it. Not to me, to Sarah." Jessica froze, her eyes widening. "Sarah?" she asked, her voice full of horror. "You mean, tell her?" "Yes," Michael said, his eyes unyielding. "You slept with her husband. You ruined not only our lives, but hers too. If you want me to believe you're taking responsibility, tell her the truth. All of it. No excuses." Jessica turned pale, her hands gripping the cup so tightly that she almost spilled the tea. "Michael, this will destroy her," she said, her voice shaking. "Sarah, she's so kind. She doesn't deserve this." "Did I deserve it?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Did you think I didn't deserve it when you kissed him? When you lied to me? If you can't be honest with her, how can I trust you to be honest with me?" She was silent, her eyes full of tears. She knew he was right, but the thought of facing Sarah, of telling her about her affair with Thomas, was like a knife in her chest. Sarah was the only person who had supported her after the breakup, without knowing the truth. It would be a betrayal, another one. I don't know if I can," she said, her voice barely audible. Michael looked at her, his face stern, but there was a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "It's your choice," he said, "but this is your last chance to show you're serious. I'm not promising I'll forgive you. I'm not promising we'll get back together. But if you can't do that, there's nothing between us, ever." Jessica nodded, her tears falling onto the table. She knew he wasn't joking, that this wasn't a game. She wanted to win back his trust, to prove she wasn't who she was. But the price was higher than she could have imagined. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice weak but determined. "I'll talk to Sarah. I have to." Michael nodded, his face unreadable. "Okay," he said, "but this isn't for me, Jessica. This is for you." If you can't be honest, you'll never change. He stood up, throwing the coffee money on the table. I have to go, he said. Let me know when you do. Or don't. It's your choice. He walked away, leaving her alone. Jessica sat there, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew she had to face Sarah, but the thought of it scared her more than anything. She had ruined Michael's life, and now she had to ruin Sarah's. But she had to do it not just for Michael, but for herself. She finished her tea, her thoughts chaotic, but with a new clarity. She didn't know if Michael would forgive her, but she knew she had to try to be better. And that started with the truth. Michael walked out of the cafe, his steps steady, but inside he was in turmoil. He hadn't expected that meeting Jessica would affect him so much. Her tears, her words, her vulnerability, all of it had opened up an old wound. He wanted to hate her, he wanted to forget her, but a part of him, the part that still remembered their happy days, wanted to believe that she could change. He got into the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The condition he had set to tell Sarah wasn't just a test. It was a way to force Jessica to face the consequences, to take responsibility. Jessica Lake stood outside Sarah Brady's office, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold on to her bag. The hallway of the college's humanities building was silent, except for the distant hum of voices from the classrooms. It was morning, and the light from the tall windows fell on Sarah's nameplate, reflecting her own pale face. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic, but her heart was pounding like it wanted to burst out of her chest. She knew she had to do this for Michael, for herself, for the truth. But the thought of ruining Sarah's life, kind, trusting Sarah, was almost too much to bear. She knocked, her knuckles barely touching the door. A second later, Sarah's warm voice rang out. Come in. Jessica opened the door and walked in. Sarah's office was the same as last time, cozy, with a soft couch, a green plant in the corner, and a photo of Sarah with Thomas on the desk. Sarah was sitting at her desk, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun, her smile as open as ever. Jessica, Sarah said, standing up. It's good to see you. Sit down. Would you like some tea? No, thank you, Jessica said, her voice hoarse. She sat down on the couch, her hands clutching her bag like a life preserver. I didn't come for a consultation. I have something I need to say. Sarah frowned, but her smile didn't disappear. Of course, she said, sitting down opposite him. What's wrong? You look upset. Jessica swallowed, her eyes dropping to the floor. She had rehearsed these words all night, but now they seemed foreign to her, heavy as stones. Sarah, she began, her voice shaking. I did something terrible, and you deserve to know the truth. Sarah leaned closer, her face becoming more serious. Jessica, you're scaring me, she said softly. What happened? Jessica closed her eyes, her fingers clutching at her bag. She had to say it, had to be honest, even if it crushed them both. I was with Thomas, she said, her voice barely audible. We had an affair. For months. I slept with your husband. The silence in the room became deafening. Sarah froze, her eyes wide and her face pale. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Jessica forced herself to continue, her words rushing out as if she were afraid to stop. It started soon after I started working here, she said. We were having coffee, talking, and it just happened. I knew he was married, I knew it was wrong, but I let it go on. I was selfish, weak. I ruined my relationship, and now I'm ruining yours. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I don't know how to fix this, but you should have known. Sarah looked at her, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Her face was still, but her eyes were filled with tears that she was trying to hold back. Jessica felt her own tears stinging her cheeks, but she didn't dare wipe them away. You and Thomas, Sarah said finally, her voice shaking like a thin sheet of paper. My Thomas? You slept with him? Yeah, Jessica nodded, her voice breaking. I hate myself for it. I didn't mean to hurt you. I had to tell the truth. Sarah stood up, her movements jerky as if she were trying to keep herself from falling. She walked to the window, her back straight but her shoulders shaking. "I trusted him," she said, her voice quiet but full of pain. "And you, I thought you were my friend. I helped you, listened to you, and you slept with my husband." Jessica covered her face with her hands, her tears flowing through her fingers. "I know," she said. "I know I betrayed you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I had to be honest." Sarah turned, her eyes full of tears, but there was steel in them too. "Thank you for your honesty," she said, her voice shaking. "But I want you to go. Right now." Jessica nodded, her body shaking as she stood. She wanted to say something else, to apologize again, but the words were stuck. She picked up her bag and walked out, closing the door behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her tears falling silently. She felt the guilt, heavy as a stone, but there was also a strange relief in the pain she had done it, told the truth, even if it ruined everything. She knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she had taken the step she had to take. Sarah stayed in the office, her hands shaking as she sat down at her desk. She looked at the picture of Thomas, their smiles, their happiness, and felt her world crumble. She trusted him, loved him, and built a life with him. And he lied to her, cheated on her, destroyed everything they had. And Jessica, the woman she helped, the woman she sympathized with, was part of that betrayal. She picked up the phone and called her father, her voice weak but determined. "Dad," she said when he answered, "I need your help. It's about Thomas." Her father, a wealthy businessman, had always been her rock. He listened to her, his voice calm but firm. He promised to send his lawyer and a detective to gather evidence. Sarah knew it would be painful, but she was not going to back down. That night, Sarah sat in the living room of their home, her eyes red from crying but her face determined. Thomas walked in, his briefcase in hand, his smile as charming as ever. "Hello, dear," he said, putting his briefcase on the floor. "You're late. Is everything okay?" Sarah looked at him, her hands clutching the folder of papers her father's detective had handed her. There were messages, call logs, even photos Thomas and Jessica in a cafe, at a hotel, in a park. "No, Thomas," she said, her voice cold. "Nothing is okay." He frowned, his smile disappearing. "What happened?" he asked, sitting down opposite. "You look upset." She threw the folder on the table, the papers scattering, revealing his face next to Jessica. "It happened," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You slept with Jessica Lake. You lied to me, cheated on me, ruined our marriage." Thomas paled, his eyes scanning the papers. He opened his mouth to protest, but she raised her hand. "Don't lie," she said. "Jessica told me everything. And I have proof. Did you think I wouldn't know? Did you think I was that naive?" "Sarah, listen," he began, his voice soft, manipulative. "This was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I love you, you know that. We can fix this." She shook her head, her eyes full of tears but determination. "No, Thomas," she said. "We can't fix this. I'm filing for divorce. My father has already contacted a lawyer. You're getting nothing, not the house, not the savings, not my love. You've destroyed it." He stood up, his face contorted with anger. "You can't just throw it all away," he said, his voice growing louder. "After everything we've had?" "You threw it away," she replied, her voice firm. "Go away. Today." Thomas looked at her, his charm, his confidence crumbling. He knew that her father, with his money and connections, would make sure he lost everything. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out, slamming the door. Sarah was alone, her tears streaming, but she felt a strange strength. She had lost her marriage, but not herself, and she was going to start over. Jessica stood outside Michael's apartment door, her heart pounding. It was the evening of the next day, and she had just left a message for Sarah, apologizing again, even though she knew it was useless. She had done what Michael had asked her to do, tell Sarah the truth, and now she was here to prove that she had changed. She knocked, her hands shaking. Michael opened the door, his face tired but firm. He looked at her, his eyes wary. "Jessica," he said, his voice even. "Come in." She walked in, her steps unsteady. The living room was just as she remembered, but without their photograph on the table. It was a blow, but she pulled herself together. "I did it," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "I talked to Sarah. I told her everything. She's destroyed Michael. But I was honest. I took responsibility." Michael nodded, his face unmoving. "It wasn't easy," he said. "I admit you had courage." She stepped closer, her eyes full of hope. "Michael, I know I don't deserve you," she said, her voice shaking. "But I've changed. I've been in therapy. I've been getting myself figured out. I'm not the same person I was. Please give me a chance. I want to be better for you, for us." He looked at her, his eyes full of pain, but also determination. He took a step back, his arms crossed over his chest. "I can see that you're trying," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I respect that. But Jessica, I've moved on. I can't go back. What happened between us is gone. You broke my heart, and I can't trust you again." Her eyes filled with tears and her body trembled. "Michael, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. I love you." He shook his head, his face stern, but there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "I believe you love," he said. "But love is more than just feelings. It's trust, and I can't trust you. I have to take care of myself, Jessica, and I choose myself." She sobbed, her hands covering her face. She knew it was possible, but hearing it was like losing him all over again. She had destroyed their love, and now she had lost him forever. "I'm sorry," she said through tears. "I'm sorry for everything." Michael nodded, his face unmoving. "I know," he said, "but you have to go." She walked out, her steps heavy, her tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew it was the end, that she had lost him. But there was truth in that pain. She had done what she had to do, and now she had to live with it. Michael closed the door, his hands shaking. He felt pain, but also relief. He had made a point, freed himself from the past. He knew there was a new life ahead of him, and he was ready for it, even if it was scary. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.